When my cousin's fiancé mocked me at dinner, calling me just support staff, he didn't know three things. I was the voice that saved his life 3 years ago. I own a $2.3 million crisis consulting firm he'll never be able to afford. And by the end of that weekend, his wedding would be canceled, not by him, but by the bride who finally learned what real strength looks like. My name is Elena Morrison. I'm 54 years old, and this is the story of how invisibility became my greatest weapon. The Mercedes S-Class handled Pine Ridge's snow-covered roads better than I expected. $95,000 bought more than leather seats and a quiet engine. It bought the kind of presence that turned heads at stoplights, the kind of machine that whispered success before you ever opened your mouth. I'd paid cash for it 6 months ago, the same week my consulting firm crossed the $2 million mark in annual revenue. The salesman had stumbled over his words when I'd declined financing, his assumptions about a middle-aged woman in sensible boots crumbling, as I'd signed the purchase agreement with a Montblanc pen that cost more than his monthly commission. Nobody in my family knew about the car. They still thought I drove the 10-year-old Honda Civic I'd mentioned at Christmas 5 years ago. Nobody asked for updates. Nobody wondered if things had changed. The laptop on my passenger seat glowed with an email from Goldman Sachs, confirming my quarterly portfolio review. 1.8 million in diversified investments, the result of 25 years of careful decisions, and a financial advisor who'd learned not to underestimate women, who asked the right questions. I closed the screen before turning onto Maple Drive, where my Uncle George's house sat like a Norman Rockwell painting, warm light spilling from windows onto snow that looked almost staged in its perfection. I'd learned a long time ago that silence protects what visibility destroys. My family couldn't diminish what they didn't know existed. They couldn't minimize success they'd never seen. For 2 decades, I'd let them believe their preferred narrative. Elena the government worker, Elena the spinster, Elena who chose paperwork over family and would die alone surrounded by filing cabinets. The truth sat in my penthouse overlooking downtown Minneapolis, $680,000 of real estate I'd purchased without a mortgage 3 years ago. The truth lived in my walk-in closet, where Armani suits hung beside designer dresses I wore to conferences, where my keynote speaking fee started at $25,000. The truth existed in my calendar, booked solid with Fortune 500 clients who paid Morrison Crisis Consulting top dollar, because when their worlds caught fire, I was the one who knew how to navigate through smoke. But tonight, I was just Elena, the family afterthought, the woman who'd never quite figured out how to be normal. I grabbed the wine from the passenger seat, a $200 Cabernet I'd let them assume stretched my budget to breaking. The bottle felt heavier than it should, weighted with the performance I was about to give. The careful dance of appearing grateful for inclusion, while knowing I could buy this house 3 times over without touching my retirement accounts. The cold hit sharp and clean when I stepped out, Minnesota winter doing what it did best, making you question every life choice that kept you north of the Mason-Dixon line. My boots crunched through snow that sparkled under the porch light, each step carrying me closer to the choreography we'd all agreed to perform. They would ask surface questions. I would give surface answers. Everyone would pretend we were a family who actually knew each other. The door opened before I could knock. Uncle George, 63, and aging into the kind of man who still believed a firm handshake solved most problems, pulled me into a hug that smelled like Old Spice and wood smoke. His voice carried genuine warmth. "Elena, come in, you must be freezing." The house hadn't changed since I was a child. Same oak floors, same floral wallpaper, same photographs documenting decades of gatherings I'd attended, but never quite belonged to. The living room buzzed with pre-wedding energy, that particular frequency of excitement that comes before something important, when hope still outweighs reality and everyone believes the promises they're making. She stood in the center of it all, exactly where she'd always stood, the bright, burning sun around which the rest of us orbited. Amber Chen, 28 years old, my cousin's daughter, golden-haired and perfect, in the way that makes strangers on the street turn and stare. Her dress probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, soft cream fabric that moved like water when she laughed. I recognized it immediately. Vera Wang, $3,200, from the spring collection I'd seen when consulting for Vera Wang's corporate office during a crisis management seminar last year. She didn't know I'd been there. Nobody knew I'd been there. That's how I liked it. Beside her stood the reason for this weekend's celebration. Derek Sullivan, 31 years old, 6'2", built like someone who'd been carved from marble by a sculptor who believed in symmetry. His face belonged on magazine covers, strong jaw and confident smile, and the kind of eyes that crinkled at the corners when he laughed. He wore his firefighter identity like a second skin. Every gesture calibrated to remind you he ran into burning buildings while you ran out. My Aunt Margaret intercepted me before I'd fully crossed the threshold, her hug brief and obligatory, her voice carrying that particular tone reserved for relatives you felt required to include. She gestured vaguely in my direction. "Everyone, Elena's here. You remember Elena, she works for the government, does paperwork and things." The phrase landed like it always did, reducing 25 years of career achievement to something that happened in cubicles under fluorescent lights. I'd saved lives, prevented disasters, built a consulting empire from nothing but intelligence and nerve. But sure, paperwork and things. Derek's handshake was firm, the kind men give when they're trying to establish dominance through pressure and eye contact. His smile never quite reached his eyes. "Nice to meet you. Government work, huh? Admin support?" I let my own smile stay soft, practiced, the expression I'd perfected for moments exactly like this. Something like that. Amber floated over, champagne glass in one hand, diamond engagement ring catching light like a small sun strapped to her finger. She touched my arm with the kind of affection that looked generous, but felt like marking territory. Her voice dripped honey. "Elena, we're so glad you could make it. I know you're so busy with your job. What is it you do again?" She knew. She'd been told 100 times, but asking let her perform curiosity while reminding everyone she'd never found my answer interesting enough to remember. I handed her the wine. "Crisis management. I brought this for dinner." She glanced at the bottle, clearly not recognizing the label, assuming it was something I'd agonized over at the grocery store. "How sweet! You shouldn't have spent so much." If she only knew, if any of them knew. But that was the point, wasn't it? Knowledge was power, and I'd learned to hoard both like a dragon guarding gold. Dinner started. The way these things always started. An elaborate performance of normalcy, where everyone pretended we were closer than we were. The dining room table could seat 12, but tonight we were 8. Me at the far end, naturally, the seat that never quite belonged to anyone, but somehow always belonged to me. The last chair filled, the afterthought position. My mother sat 3 seats away, 71 years old and still beautiful in the way women become when they stop fighting age and start negotiating with it. Judith Morrison had opinions about everything and the confidence to share them freely, especially regarding her children's life choices. She'd spent the last 2 decades perfecting her expression of polite disappointment whenever my name came up in conversation. My brother Vincent sat beside her, 57 and successful in the way lawyers become when they win more than they lose. His firm handled corporate law for clients whose names appeared in Forbes. He wore success like tailored suits, visible, expensive, meant to be noticed. We'd been close once, before I'd chosen a path he couldn't understand. Before my decisions had become evidence of character flaws he felt obligated to point out. Aunt Margaret fussed over serving dishes. Her husband George poured wine, and Amber held court like she'd been born for it. Every gesture timed for maximum charm. Every laugh calibrated to make whoever triggered it feel momentarily special. The conversation flowed around me like water around stone. Wedding details, honeymoon plans. The new house Derek and Amber had bought in the suburbs. 3 bedrooms and a yard, the kind of place where you raised children and hosted barbecues and built the life everyone agreed you were supposed to want. Then Derek stood up. He didn't ask for attention. He commanded it, the way men do when they're used to being listened to when they've spent years building an identity around being someone people look at. His voice carried that particular quality of storytelling, the rhythm of someone who'd told this tale before and knew exactly where the beats landed. "I want to share something. About the night that changed my life, the night I almost died." The table quieted instantly, forks pausing mid-journey to mouths, glasses freezing halfway to lips. Even the candles seemed to still, flame holding steady as if the air itself had stopped moving. My chest tightened. I knew what was coming. I'd known the moment I heard Derek's name, the moment Amber had mentioned her fiancé was a firefighter, the moment I'd put together pieces of a puzzle I'd been trying not to see for 3 years. Derek's eyes went distant, seeing something the rest of us couldn't, remembering something that had carved itself into his bones. 3 years ago, Redport Chemical plant exploded. Biggest industrial fire Minnesota had seen in decades. My team, Unit 6, we were first on scene. 6 of us went in. He paused for effect, letting the weight of that number settle. 6 men, 6 lives. I remembered each one's voice over the radio, the different textures of fear and training, fighting for dominance, as smoke choked communication to static-filled fragments. Derek's hands moved as he spoke, painting pictures in the air. The temperature hit 800 degrees inside, metal melting around us, dripping like water. Except water doesn't burn skin on contact. The ceiling groaned. This sounded like the building was alive and dying at the same time. Every second, I thought, this is it. This is where we die. I reached for my wine glass, needing something to hold, something to keep my hands from shaking. The glass was cool against my palm, solid and real while Derek spun his story, weaving truth and fiction together so seamlessly I almost believed he believed it. He hit the details I remembered, the ones that still woke me up some nights, heart racing, skin slick with sweat that felt too much like the way I'd sweated that night, locked in a concrete room with 12 screens and 6 lives depending on decisions I had to make faster than fear could catch up. Derek's voice dropped lower, intimate, pulling everyone in. Shaft 3B was our only exit, but getting there meant navigating through 4 collapsed corridors. The smoke was so thick you couldn't see your own hand. Chemical smoke, the kind that burns your lungs, makes every breath feel like inhaling glass. Shaft 3B. He remembered that detail because I'd repeated it 6 times, each iteration more urgent as the thermal imaging had shown the ceiling stress reaching critical levels. Unit 6, Shaft 3B is your only viable exit. Repeat, Shaft 3B. He continued, voice building momentum. There was this moment, this split second, where the heat sensor alarms went off. Chemical tank spilling, acid eating through the floor. I could smell it before the alarm, that sharp, bitter smell that means you're about to die if you don't move. I'd seen it 8 seconds before his sensors caught it. Thermal bloom spreading across camera 12, the signature pattern of sulfuric acid breaching containment. I'd been calculating trajectory while he was still breathing through his mask, trying to see through smoke that turned his world into blind guessing. Derek straightened, shoulders back, chest forward, the physical language of heroism. And I made the call. Keep moving. Trust the route. Get my team out alive. The table erupted in appreciative murmurs, heads nodding, eyes shining with reflected glory. Amber touched his arm, proprietary and proud, the gesture of a woman who'd won some prize the rest of us could only admire from a distance. Judith, my mother, leaned forward. That's incredible, Derek. Real heroism, not like sitting in an office pushing papers. The comparison wasn't subtle. Nothing with my mother ever was. She'd perfected the art of the compliment that doubled as criticism. Praise for others that highlighted your failures without ever mentioning your name. Vincent raised his glass. To Derek, a genuine hero. They drank, I drank. The wine tasted like ash in my mouth, like smoke and burning metal and 38 minutes of hell I'd lived through while sitting in a chair, watching men I'd never met almost die on screens that reduced human beings to heat signatures and coordinates. Derek wasn't finished. He was on a roll now, feeding off the attention, adding details that made the story bigger, better, more centered on his decisions and leadership. He gestured expansively. There was a voice on the radio that night. Someone from command trying to help. Some guy who sounded pretty shaky, honestly. Probably terrified, safe in his bunker while we were burning alive. Some guy. The assumption landed so casually, so completely, it almost made me laugh. Almost. Derek continued, confidence growing with each word. But here's the thing about leadership under fire. You can't just follow orders blindly. You have to verify, use your instincts, make the tough calls when command doesn't understand what you're actually facing. Amber squeezed his hand. That's what makes you different, baby. You don't just follow, you lead. The story kept building. Derek's version where he'd navigated by instinct, where his gut calls had saved them, where the voice on the radio had been a helpful suggestion. He'd wisely chosen to trust after independently confirming it was the right move. He described the West Junction, the turn that had taken them away from the ceiling collapse. He described it like a decision he'd made, a moment of clarity in chaos where his training had cut through confusion and shown him the path. I'd watched that ceiling on thermal imaging, watched the stress fractures spread like spider webs, watched the temperature differential that told me exactly how many seconds we had before tons of steel and concrete turned the West Corridor into a tomb. 90 seconds. I'd counted every one, while directing them through turns they couldn't see, around obstacles that only existed on my screens. Derek reached into his pocket, pulling out something wrapped in black cloth. The table's attention sharpened, everyone leaning in slightly, drawn by the ritual of a reveal. He unwrapped it slowly, building drama. A piece of charred metal, roughly the size of a hand, warped and blackened by heat, that had tried to erase whatever it had once been. He'd mounted it on a wooden base, added a small plaque. Redport, the night we survived. The metal passed around the table like a holy relic, each person touching it with reverence, connecting to history through this fragment of destruction. Derek's voice carried pride. Found this at the West Junction, right where we made the turn, right where that voice told us to go, and I decided to trust my gut that it was the right call. When the metal reached me, I took it carefully, feeling the weight of it, the rough texture of thermal damage. My hands didn't shake. Years of crisis management had taught me how to keep my body still even when my mind raced. But inside, something cracked open. A door I'd kept carefully locked, swinging wide. I knew this piece. Not personally, not from touching it, but from watching it fall on thermal camera 12, watching it separate from the cooling system 3 seconds after I'd given the order to move. Valve number 7. Registered in Redport's system as RD3B0847, 47 pounds of industrial steel that had glowed white-hot before breaking free and crashing to the floor exactly where Derek's team would have been standing if I hadn't told them to move left. 3 seconds. That's how close they'd come. That's how narrow the margin between 6 men walking out alive and 6 families getting visits from captains who'd practiced their condolence speeches in mirrors. I turned the metal over in my hands, feeling the surface, seeing the serial number partially visible under the char. RD3B. The number swam slightly in my vision, memory and present colliding until I wasn't sure which version was real, the one where I'd watched this fall on a screen, or the one where it sat solid and heavy in my palm. Derek leaned back in his chair, casual, comfortable, the posture of someone who'd told this story enough times that it had become smooth, the rough edges of fear and helplessness polished away by repetition, until only the heroic parts remained shiny and bright. His voice carried easy confidence. The West Junction isn't even really a direction, it's more of a feeling. That moment where training and instinct come together and you just know which way to go. The West Junction. Coordinates 44.8 degrees north, 93.1 degrees west. Marked on Redport's emergency floor plans with a red X that I'd studied until I could see it with my eyes closed. Not a feeling. Math. Thermal distribution patterns, structural integrity calculations. The intersection where 3 possible routes collapse down to 1 viable exit, with temperature below lethal and ceiling stress below critical. Amber raised her champagne glass, bubbles catching candlelight. To Derek, my hero. The table echoed her toast, glasses rising, voices joining in celebration of courage and leadership, and the kind of story people loved because it had a hero who looked like heroes were supposed to look. Tall, handsome, male, brave. I drank. The wine had gone from ash to something worse, something that tasted like watching your own history get rewritten by someone who didn't know you'd been there. Watching them steal credit for survival they couldn't have achieved alone. Judith turned to me, her voice carrying that particular tone mothers use when they're about to make a point disguised as casual conversation. Elena, dear, you must be so proud to be here celebrating Amber's big day. It's nice that even someone in your position can enjoy these special moments. Even someone. The phrase hung in the air like smoke, visible to everyone, acknowledged by no one. Even someone in your small life, your lesser career, your diminished circumstances, could find joy in the success of people who'd done things right. I smiled, the expression I'd perfected over years of these dinners. I'm very happy for Amber. Vincent set his fork down, his lawyer's voice carrying easy authority. You know, sis, maybe watching this will inspire you. There's still time to settle down. You're only 54. Plenty of women find partners in their 50s. The concern was genuine, which somehow made it worse. He actually believed he was helping, pointing out the obvious solution to my obvious problem. I was alone, therefore I was incomplete, therefore I needed to fix myself by finding someone to complete me. I could have told him about the coffee dates I'd turned down, the successful men who'd asked for second dinners, the departmental director who'd made his interests clear at last year's conference. I could have explained that alone and lonely were different countries, that I'd chosen solitude the way people choose challenging careers, with full knowledge of the costs and benefits. Instead, I'll keep that in mind. Amber leaned forward, her voice sweetening with something that might have been concern, if concern didn't feel so much like pity. Elena's just dedicated to her work, aren't you? What is it you do exactly? Data entry? Report filing? She knew. We'd had this conversation at 3 separate family gatherings. But asking again let her perform ignorance, let her frame my work as something forgettable, the kind of job that didn't merit remembering. I took another sip of wine, feeling it burn all the way down. Crisis management. I coordinate emergency responses. Derek perked up, interest flickering across his face. Oh yeah? Like what? Making sure the coffee machine works during emergencies? Scheduling disaster drills? The table cracked up. Genuine laughter. Not cruel, but comfortable. The kind that lands when everyone shares the same assumptions about what's funny and who's allowed to be the punchline. I smiled along, letting them have it, letting them believe this was all I did, all I'd ever do. The alternative meant explaining, and explaining meant performing competence for an audience that had already decided I had none. Derek was warming to his theme now, emboldened by the laughter, by Amber's delighted expression, by the feeling of being the smartest person in the room. No offense, but people in offices don't really understand crisis. Real crisis. The kind where you can't just send an email or reschedule a meeting, where seconds matter and people die if you make the wrong call. His eyes scanned the table, gathering agreement. I've heard office people on emergency calls. They panic, voices shaking, completely falling apart. Real crisis work requires a different breed of person, someone who can handle the pressure without breaking. Amber touched his arm, proud. That's why I love you. You're built for the hard stuff. Not everyone is. The implication settled over me like snow, cold and light and impossible to brush off completely. Not everyone is built for hard things. People like me, safe in our offices, scheduling our meetings, living our small lives, we were made of softer materials that crumpled under real pressure. I set my wine glass down carefully, precisely centered on the table in front of me. My heartbeat steady in my chest, the same rhythm it had maintained through 3 years and hundreds of crises. The pulse of someone who'd learned to keep moving when panic wanted to freeze her in place. The choice crystallized in that moment, sharp and clear as the ice forming on the windows. I could stand up, walk out, let them have their version of the world where I was small and Derek was a hero, and reality bent to accommodate whatever story made them comfortable. Or I could stay. I could let this moment breathe, let Derek keep talking, let the rope unspool enough that when it finally went taut, everyone would feel the snap. Derek wasn't finished. He was riding the high of audience engagement, that particular pleasure that comes from holding a room's attention, making them laugh, making them look at you like you're someone worth watching. He leaned back, gesture expansive. I mean, think about that night at Redport. The voice on the radio, command, whatever, sure he was trying to help. But it was my team, my responsibility, my call to actually move when he suggested we go left at the West Junction. My breath caught, just for a second, just long enough for the memory to crash over me like a wave. Unit 6, this is command. You have 45 seconds before ceiling collapse. Turn left at the West Junction. Repeat, turn left now. Not a suggestion. An order. One I'd given after watching the thermal map show me exactly how long the support beams would hold, after calculating the spread rate of the fire, after running 3 different evacuation models through the computer, and finding only one route that didn't end with body bags. Derek continued, voice rich with the authority of someone who'd never been contradicted. Command said left, but I'm the one who had to trust it, verify it with my own eyes, make the call to move when my team was looking to me for leadership. Amber practically glowed. That's the difference between talking about crisis and living it. Derek lives it. Judith nodded, looking at me with an expression that managed to be both sympathetic and disappointed. Some people are meant for action, others for support. Both are necessary. Support. The word landed like a door closing, like every assumption they'd made about me clicking into place. Support staff, support roles, supporting cast in other people's stories. Vincent reached for the bottle, refilling his glass. Elena, you must see that sometimes, right? In your work? The difference between the people who make decisions and the people who facilitate them? The question was genuine. He really wanted to know if I understood my place, if I recognized the hierarchy he'd constructed, where his courtroom victories and Derek's burning buildings sat at the top, while my crisis management sat somewhere in the murky middle, necessary but unglamorous, the scaffolding that supported real work without being the work itself. I could have told him about the pharmaceutical CEO who'd called me at 2 a.m, when a factory explosion threatened to release enough toxic chemicals to evacuate 3 counties. I could have described walking him through shutdown procedures step by step, while his voice shook with the knowledge that one wrong valve could kill thousands. I could have mentioned the standing ovation I'd received at the National Emergency Management Conference after my keynote on crisis coordination saved 6 different departments from making catastrophic errors during last year's flooding. Instead, I picked up my fork, cutting into salmon that had gone cold while Derek held court. I've seen all kinds of people under pressure. Amber laughed, misunderstanding entirely. I bet. Probably so stressful when the copier jams during a big report deadline. More laughter. Comfortable, easy. The kind that comes when everyone's in on the joke and no one's getting hurt except the person who doesn't count. Derek stood, stretching. The gesture of someone who'd given enough attention to dinner and was ready to move to the next thing, but he paused, looking down at the charred metal still sitting near his plate, something crossing his face that looked almost like sincerity. His voice went quieter. You know what the crazy thing is? I've spent 3 years wondering who that voice was. The command analyst that night. Tried to find out, filed requests, asked everyone. All they'd tell me was it was classified for operational security. He picked up the metal piece, turning it over. I wanted to thank him, properly. He probably saved our lives with those directions, even if I'm the one who had to execute them. Would have been nice to shake his hand. His hand. The assumption so complete, so unquestioned, it didn't even register as an assumption. Of course, command had been a man. Who else could have handled that kind of pressure? Who else could have made those calls with lives hanging in the balance? Certainly not someone like me. Someone who filed reports and scheduled meetings and lived the kind of small life that made people wonder if I understood what real crisis even looked like. Derek set the metal back down. But you know how government bureaucracy is. They'll never tell me. Probably retired by now, living somewhere quiet, telling stories about the old days. I felt something shift in my chest. A door opening onto a room I'd kept locked for 3 years. Not anger. Anger was too hot, too loud, too easy to dismiss. This was colder, sharper, the feeling of standing at a crossroads and seeing both paths clearly enough to make a real choice. I could stay quiet, keep the secret, protect the comfortable fiction that let Derek feel like a hero, and my family feel justified in their dismissal. The work would continue regardless. Crisis management didn't require recognition to function. I'd saved lives they'd never know about, prevented disasters they'd never hear of, built a career so successful I could retire tomorrow if I wanted to. Or I could speak, open the door all the way, let light into a room that had been dark so long everyone had forgotten it existed. The metal sat on the table between us, physical evidence of a night Derek remembered one way and I remembered another. Valve RD3B0847. 47 pounds of industrial steel that had separated from the cooling system at exactly 11:52:17 p.m., 3 seconds after I'd given the order to move. 3 seconds. The margin between survival and death. The space between hero stories and truth. I stood, chair scraping against hardwood, the sound cutting through the dinner party murmur. Heads turned, conversations paused. I felt the weight of their attention, familiar and uncomfortable, the spotlight I'd spent 2 decades avoiding. My voice came out steady, calm, the same tone I used when coordinating evacuations or talking people through disasters. "Excuse me, I need some air." The concerned murmurs followed me to the door. Judith half stood, maternal instinct overriding judgment. "Elena, are you all right?" I grabbed all my coat from the rack, fingers finding wool automatically. "Fine, just need to clear my head." The cold outside felt like waking up, sharp and clarifying and real in a way the dinner party's warmth hadn't been. Snow fell in lazy spirals, catching light from the windows, turning the yard into something that looked almost peaceful. I walked to the edge of the porch, breath clouding in front of me, hands shaking slightly now that no one was watching. 3 years. I'd kept this secret for 3 years. Not because anyone had ordered me to, but because I'd learned early that being good at something frightened people more than being bad at it. Excellence made others uncomfortable. Success required explanation, justification, proof that you deserved it. Mediocrity asked for nothing except to be left alone. So I'd stayed quiet, built my empire in silence, let my family believe what they wanted, while the truth grew larger in the spaces between what they knew and what existed. But tonight felt different. Tonight the fiction had worn thin enough to tear, the gap between perception and reality wide enough to fall through. Derek's casual assumptions, Amber's pitying questions, Vincent's helpful suggestions, Judith's loaded compliments. All of it had stacked up like kindling waiting for a match. The door behind me opened. Cold air rushed in, meeting warm air rushing out, the collision creating a brief fog that dissipated as footsteps crossed the threshold. Male voice, unfamiliar, carrying something that sounded like urgency. "Ma'am, I need to talk to you." I turned. The man standing in the doorway wasn't part of the dinner party, wasn't someone I recognized from earlier. He looked about 47, weathered in the way people get when they work outside, when they see hard things regularly and carry them in the lines around their eyes. He stepped fully outside, letting the door close behind him. "I'm Cole Martinez. I was in Unit 6 that night." The world tilted slightly. Everything suddenly too clear, too sharp, too real. Another firefighter. Another person from that night. Another man who'd been in the building while I'd been watching screens, counting seconds, making calls that kept him breathing. My voice came out carefully neutral. "I don't know what you're talking about." Cole's expression didn't change. "Yes, you do. I heard everything through the window just now. Derek's story, the way he tells it like he made all the calls." He paused. "I know better." My heart kicked against my ribs. "You should go back inside." He didn't move. After we got out, after Redport, I couldn't let it go. Needed to know who the voice was. Filed Freedom of Information Act requests, called every contact I had in the department, spent 2 years pushing until someone finally cracked. The snow kept falling, gentle and relentless, covering everything in white. Cole's voice dropped lower. "They told me it was classified, but they let one thing slip. The analyst that night was a woman, female crisis coordinator with 15 years of experience, someone who'd guided multiple rescues, prevented 3 major disasters, had a record so clean it made everyone else look sloppy." He took a step closer. Someone who saved 6 lives while monitoring 12 simultaneous threat vectors across 4 different camera feeds. I couldn't breathe right. The air felt too thin, too cold, too full of truths I'd been avoiding. "Cole. That was you, wasn't it? Elena Morrison. The woman they introduce as someone who does paperwork. The one they dismiss and diminish and treat like she barely matters." The question hung between us, crystalline and unavoidable. I could deny it, laugh it off, walk away, keep the door locked, the room dark, the comfortable fiction intact. Or I could answer. My hands weren't shaking anymore. Something had steadied inside me, settled into place like pieces of a puzzle finally connecting. The career I'd built, the life I'd chosen, the truth I'd protected because protection felt safer than exposure. But safety wasn't the same as rightness, and silence wasn't the same as peace. I met his eyes. "Why does it matter?" Cole's face shifted, something like vindication crossing his features. "Because Derek's been building his reputation on a lie for 3 years. Because he just told a story in there that erases you completely. Because the woman who saved my life deserves better than to be called support staff by the man who'd be dead without her." Inside the house, laughter erupted. muffled by walls and windows, but audible enough to remind me what waited in there. More stories, more assumptions, more comfortable dismissals. Derek would keep talking. Amber would keep glowing. My family would keep believing the version of me they'd constructed from prejudice and preference. I looked at Cole, this man I'd never met but whose voice I'd heard broken by fear, whose life I'd held in my hands for 38 minutes while making decisions faster than thought. My voice came out stronger. He was brave that night. They all were. Walking into fire when every instinct screams to run. That takes courage. I won't diminish that. Cole nodded. True. But courage without guidance is just people dying bravely. You gave us the path. Every turn, every decision, every second that kept us breathing, that was you. We stood there in this cold, truth settling between us like snow accumulating on the ground, building up one flake at a time until the weight of it became undeniable. Cole, you going back in there? I looked at the house. Warm light spilling from windows. The sounds of family and celebration drifting out into the winter night. Inside, Derek would still be the hero. Amber would still be the golden girl. I would still be the afterthought, the support staff, the woman who'd somehow failed to figure out how life was supposed to work. Or I could change the story, let the truth out, open the door I'd kept locked, and see what happened when light finally reached the corners. Decision crystallized, cold, and clear, and absolutely certain. I turned back to the door. Yeah, I'm going back in. Cole smiled, something fierce and approving. Good, because what he's doing in there, taking credit for your work, that's not just wrong, it's insulting, and you deserve better than insults from people you saved. We walk back inside together, heat hitting like a wall after the Minnesota cold. The dinner party had moved to the living room, coffee and dessert replacing wine and main courses. Everyone settling into that comfortable post-meal lull where conversation goes lazy and laughter comes easy. Derek stood near the fireplace, the charred metal piece on the mantel behind him like a trophy. He was mid-sentence, telling another story. Something about training rookies and teaching them the difference between following orders and making judgment calls. He saw me, paused, offered a friendly smile. Elena, thought we lost you to the cold. Want some coffee? Everyone turned, expectant faces. My mother's concerned frown. Vincent's casual dismissal already forming. Amber's perfectly practiced smile that managed to be welcoming and condescending simultaneously. I walked to the center of the room, feeling Cole behind me, a presence that anchored me to this moment, this choice, this truth I was about to unbury. You. My voice cut through the casual atmosphere. Actually, Derek, I need to correct something you said at dinner. The room's energy shifted, attention sharpening. Derek's smile faltered slightly, confusion crossing his face. He managed to laugh. Correct what? I pointed to the metal piece on the mantel. That valve, number RD3B0847. You said you found it at the West Junction after the voice on the radio suggested you turn left. Derek nodded, still confused. Yeah, that's what happened. I let the pause extend, feeling everyone lean forward slightly, curiosity pulling them in. Then I spoke. And my voice changed, dropped lower, steadied completely. Became the voice I'd used that night 3 years ago. The voice that had talked 6 men through hell while watching their heat signatures flicker on screens. The voice that had counted seconds and calculated probabilities and made calls that kept people breathing. Unit 6, hold position, heat increasing ahead. Debris imminent, turn left now. Derek's face drained of color, complete, instantaneous recognition. His body actually jerked backward, hand coming up like he'd been struck. I kept going, letting the words pour out in the exact rhythm I'd used that night, the exact tone and pace and authority that had carried through static and smoke and terror. Shaft 3B clear, right side unstable, ceiling collapse in 3 seconds. Keep moving. Derek's coffee cup slipped from his fingers, hit the carpet without breaking. Brown liquid spreading across white fibers. Nobody moved to clean it. Nobody could move. The room had frozen, every person locked in place by the shock of recognition, by the collision of assumed reality with actual truth. Team 2, maintain speed, west exit accessible, thermal overload approaching. 90 seconds. I let my voice return to normal. The effect complete. I'd proven the point. made the connection, showed them what they'd refused to see. The silence that followed felt physical, pressing down on everyone like weight, like atmosphere suddenly made tangible. Derek's lips moved without sound, tried again, finally managed words that came out barely above a whisper. That was you. The voice that night. That was your voice. I didn't need to confirm it. The truth sat in the room now, undeniable, solid as the metal piece on the mantel, heavy as 3 years of secrets finally spoken aloud. Amber stood frozen, champagne glass halfway to her lips, face cycling through confusion to shock to something that looked almost like fear. Vincent had gone completely still, his lawyer's mind probably calculating, assessing, trying to reconcile what he'd just heard with everything he thought he knew. Judith's hand covered her mouth, eyes wide, looking at me like she'd never seen me before, like her daughter had just been replaced by a stranger who wore her face, but contained depths she'd never imagined existed. Cole stepped forward, voice carrying quiet authority. I was there that night, in Unit 6 with Derek, and I can confirm that's the voice that guided us out, the voice that saved our lives while monitoring multiple threat vectors simultaneously across 12 different camera feeds. He looked at Derek. You were brave. No one can take that from you. But leadership, navigation, the calls that kept us alive, that came from her. The silence stretched, pulled taut, ready to snap. Then Derek did something I didn't expect. His legs gave out. He sat down hard on the couch, head falling into his hands, shoulders shaking with something that could have been laughter or crying, or the sound a person makes when their entire self-image cracks open and shows them what's been hiding underneath. His voice came out muffled, broken. I knew. Deep down, I always knew I didn't lead us out, but admitting it meant admitting I was helpless. And I couldn't live with that. The confession hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Derek's shoulders shook harder, his entire body curling inward, as if trying to fold himself small enough to disappear. The sound he made wasn't quite crying, wasn't quite laughter, something raw, the noise of a foundation crumbling. Amber took a step back from him, her champagne glass finally making it to a side table, set down with excessive care, like she was afraid any sudden movement might shatter more than crystal. Her face had gone pale beneath perfectly applied makeup, foundation suddenly too obvious against skin that had lost its color. Her voice came out thin, stretched. Derek, what are you saying? He looked up, eyes red-rimmed, meeting hers with something that looked like relief mixed with devastation. I'm saying I've been lying, to everyone, to you, to myself. Vincent finally moved, crossing to the mantel, picking up the charred metal piece like it might burn him. He examined it closely, lawyer's mind processing evidence, rebuilding conclusions from new data. His voice carried professional assessment. RD3B0847, that's specific, very specific. I felt every eye in the room shift to me, weight of attention suddenly crushing, expectant, demanding explanation for what had just torn their comfortable reality apart. My throat felt dry. Valve 7, part of the cooling system, failed due to thermal overload at 11:52:17 p.m. 3 seconds after I ordered Unit 6 to move left. So, Judith stood abruptly, chair scraping. Elena, I don't understand. You were there? At Redport? The question revealed everything she didn't know. Everything she'd never asked. 3 years. 3 years of family dinners and holiday gatherings, and she'd never once inquired deeply enough to discover what I actually did for a living, what my days contained, what my work meant. I kept my voice level. I was in Crisis Command Center, 12 screens, thermal imaging, structural monitoring. I coordinated the rescue for 38 minutes. Amber's face twisted, cycling through emotions too fast to catalog. But you never said anything, never mentioned it, never told us you were part of something that big. The accusation landed strange, backward, like I'd committed fraud by not advertising my competence, as if staying quiet about saving lives was somehow more offensive than taking credit for work I hadn't done. I met her eyes. You never asked. Silence again, different this time. Not shocked silence, but uncomfortable silence, the kind that comes when people realize they're implicated in something, when the mirror turns around and shows them things they'd rather not see. Cole moved to stand beside Derek, his presence somehow both supportive and challenging. After we got out that night, After the ambulances and debriefings, Derek asked me who I thought the command voice was. I told him it sounded experienced, professional, calm in a way that only comes from training and repetition. He looked at Derek directly. You nodded and said it was probably some veteran coordinator, someone who'd seen everything. And I agreed because that's what it sounded like. Someone who'd navigated disasters before and knew exactly how to keep people alive when systems failed. Derek's voice came out rough. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know it was a woman. They wouldn't tell us anything. Said it was classified. Cole's expression didn't soften. But you stopped trying to find out, didn't you? Because not knowing meant you could fill in the blanks however you wanted. Make it into whatever story served you best. The truth of that landed visible on Derek's face. Recognition that went bone deep. He'd constructed a narrative from gaps and assumptions, then defended it so thoroughly he'd convinced himself it was memory rather than fiction. Uncle George finally spoke, his voice carrying bewilderment. Elena, sweetheart, why didn't you tell us? Something that important, that impressive, why keep it secret? The question was genuine, and that somehow made it harder to answer. How do you explain to someone that silence became armor? That invisibility felt safer than visibility, when visibility meant judgment, when success required justification, when excellence made people uncomfortable enough to diminish it. I looked around the room at faces I'd known my whole life. Because every time I succeeded at something, someone found a way to make it smaller. When I got my first promotion, Mom said it was probably because they needed to fill a diversity quota. When I bought my condo, Vincent suggested I'd gotten a loan I couldn't afford. When I chose my career over marriage, everyone decided I'd failed at being a woman. The words came faster now, pressure releasing. So I stopped sharing, stopped seeking approval, built a life so solid that opinions couldn't touch it. And yes, that meant you didn't know what I did or how well I did it. But it also meant I didn't have to defend my choices to people who'd already decided they were wrong. Judith's hand covered her mouth, eyes shining with something that might have been tears, or might have been the realization hitting hard enough to hurt. Oh, baby, I'm so sorry. The apology felt too small for the years it tried to cover, but her voice cracked on the last word, genuine distress bleeding through. And I saw something in her face I'd never seen before. Not pity or disappointment or confused concern, but actual remorse. Real recognition of harm caused. She crossed to me, movements uncertain, like she wasn't sure she had the right. I said terrible things to you, for years, about your choices, your life, your priorities. And all that time, you were out there saving people while I was sitting in my living room, judging you for not living the life I thought you should want. Her hands found mine, gripping tight. When you turned down Michael's proposal, I cried for weeks. Told my friends my daughter was throwing her life away for a government job. Made you into a cautionary tale about women who choose careers over family. She drew a shaky breath. But 3 years ago, remember? My heart valve surgery? When I woke up panicking, couldn't breathe, thought I was dying? I nodded, remembering the call that had sent me racing to the hospital. The terror in the nurse's voice when she'd said my mother was inconsolable, that nothing was calming her down. Judith's voice dropped lower. You walked in, and everything changed. You didn't just hold my hand. You took control. Told me exactly what was happening in terms I could understand. Heart rate, oxygen levels, medication schedule. You spoke to me the way you must speak to people in crisis. That voice that makes you feel like someone competent is handling things. She squeezed my hands harder. The nurse told me later that you'd asked the doctor questions she'd never heard from a family member. Technical questions, procedural questions. You understood everything they were doing and why, could translate it from medical terminology into human language. Tears spilled over now. And I realized in that moment, my daughter has a gift I don't understand. She saves lives I'll never know about. She's built something remarkable, but I never told you I was proud. Never admitted I'd been wrong, because admitting that meant facing 20 years of judgment I couldn't take back. The room had gone still again, but different now. Not shocked stillness, but witnessing stillness. The held breath attention people give when they're watching something important happen, something that can't be interrupted. I felt my own throat tighten. Mom, I didn't need you to understand my job. I needed you to trust that I knew what I was doing with my life, that I was capable of making good decisions, even when they weren't the decisions you would have made. Judith pulled me into a hug that felt desperate, like she was trying to hold together something that had already broken. I should have trusted you. Should have asked instead of assumed. Should have celebrated instead of criticized. I'm so, so sorry. We stood there, mother and daughter, decades of misunderstanding pressing between us, and I felt something shift. Not forgiveness, that would take longer, but the beginning of it. The acknowledgement that hurt existed, that damage had been done, that repair might be possible even if it wasn't guaranteed. Vincent cleared his throat, discomfort obvious in every gesture. I owe you an apology too, Elena. A big one. I turned to face him, still holding our mother's hand. He ran fingers through hair that had gone gray at the temples. I'm a lawyer. My entire career is built on evidence, critical thinking, not making assumptions without data. But with you, I assumed. Decided you'd made poor choices because they weren't my choices. Decided you needed advice because you were single, and I wasn't. He pulled out his phone, fingers moving across the screen. When dinner started going sideways, I got curious. Started searching, found your LinkedIn. He turned the phone around, showing the screen to the room. Elena Morrison, Director of Crisis Management, Minnesota Emergency Services. Founder and CEO, Morrison Crisis Consulting, LLC. Amber moved closer, reading over his shoulder, eyes widening. Vincent scrolled. Your firm worked with 3 Fortune 500 companies last year. You were the keynote speaker at the National Emergency Management Conference. Speaking fee $25,000. You consulted during the Minneapolis bridge collapse, the Bloomington Mall fire, the Duluth chemical spill. Each fact landed like a stone dropping into still water. Ripples spreading outward, disturbing the surface of assumptions everyone had built their understanding on. Vincent kept scrolling. Public property records show you own a penthouse in downtown Minneapolis. Purchase price $680,000, paid in cash 3 years ago. The number hung in the air, impossible to ignore or reinterpret. Cash. Not a mortgage, not a loan, not years of payments. Cash. The kind of money that came from success measured in zeros. From a career that generated wealth people didn't usually associate with government work. Amber's voice came out strangled. Wait, $680,000 in cash? Vincent nodded, still reading. Your consulting firm reported revenue of $2.3 million last year. That's not salary. That's your business income, on top of whatever you make at your director position. Judith sat down heavily, processing. Elena, is this true? All of this? I could feel the walls I'd built starting to crack. Privacy dissolving under the weight of public revelation. Part of me wanted to deflect, change the subject, rebuild the protective silence that had served me so well for so long. But another part, the part that had spent 3 years holding the secret, the part that had watched Derek take credit for my work and stayed quiet because quiet felt safer, that part was tired of hiding, tired of being small, tired of letting other people's comfort matter more than my truth. My voice came out steady. Yes, it's true, all of it. Vincent's face cycled through expressions. Shock, confusion, something that looked almost like fear. But why didn't you tell us? Why let us think you were struggling, living in some tiny apartment, working some dead-end job? The question revealed so much about what he'd assumed, the narrative he'd constructed without ever checking if it matched reality. Dead-end job, tiny apartment, struggling. He'd needed me to be failing so his success could feel secure. I met his eyes, because I learned something about this family a long time ago. My success makes you uncomfortable. When I succeed, you need to diminish it. When I'm proud, you need to humble me. When I choose something different, you need to frame it as wrong. The words felt like pulling arrows from wounds, painful but necessary. So I stopped sharing, stopped seeking approval, stopped giving you opportunities to make my achievements smaller so yours could feel bigger. Vincent flinched like I'd slapped him. That's not fair. My voice stayed level. Isn't it? When I got promoted to crisis coordinator 5 years ago, you asked if they were just being nice because I'd been there so long. When I mentioned buying new furniture, you suggested I was overspending for my income level. Every achievement came with a question mark from you, a hint that maybe I didn't really earn it. Maybe I was fooling myself. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. I thought I was being helpful, realistic, making sure you weren't getting in over your head. The justification hung hollow between us. Explanation that didn't explain. Excuse that didn't excuse. I shook my head. You were protecting yourself. As long as I was struggling, your success was secure. But if I was thriving, actually building something bigger than you expected, that threatened the hierarchy, made you reconsider your assumptions. And reconsideration is uncomfortable. Amber had gone very quiet, champagne forgotten, engagement ring catching light as her hand trembled slightly. When she finally spoke, her voice came out small, younger than her 28 years. This is my fault too, isn't it? I turned to her, seeing her properly for the first time that night. Not the golden girl, not the perfect cousin, but a woman struggling with realization, with recognition of her own participation in the harm. Her eyes filled. I've been cruel to you for years. Every family gathering, I'd make little comments, ask about your job like it was cute that you worked, pity you for being single, make sure everyone knew I had the life you supposedly wanted but couldn't achieve. She wiped at tears with the back of her hand, smearing mascara. And I did it because you scare me. The admission stopped everyone. Even Derek looked up from his devastation, attention caught by the rawness in her voice. Amber's throat worked. You're 54, single, no kids, and I always pitied you, felt superior, thought I'd figured out life while you'd somehow missed the memo. But you're not pitiable. You're powerful. You've built this massive career, made all this money, saved all these lives, and you did it without needing anyone's approval. She gestured at herself, at Derek, at the engagement ring and designer dress. And I'm 28, engaged to someone I barely know, teaching a job I chose because it looks sweet on Instagram, living a life designed for other people's approval. I don't know who I am without applause, without someone telling me I'm doing it right. Her voice cracked. You terrify me because you're everything I'm afraid I can't be. Independent, certain, comfortable in your own skin even when everyone's judging you for it. The vulnerability in her confession felt almost painful to witness, like watching someone peel back protective layers to expose wounds they'd been hiding. This wasn't the Amber I knew, polished, perfect, always camera ready. This was someone younger, more frightened, struggling with the gap between image and substance. Derek finally stood, movements careful, like his body wasn't sure it could be trusted. Amber, I need to tell you something I should have told you months ago. She turned to him, fear obvious. What? His hands clenched and unclenched. After Redport, I had nightmares for 6 months. Every night. The smell of smoke, the sound of metal groaning, the feeling of suffocating even though I was safe in bed. I'd wake up screaming, covered in sweat, convinced I was still trapped. He forced himself to meet her eyes. The department put me on leave, mandatory therapy, PTSD diagnosis. I couldn't function, couldn't work, couldn't do anything except replay that night over and over. Amber's face shifted. You never told me any of this. Derek's laugh came out bitter. Because by the time I met you, I'd constructed a better story. The one where I was the hero, where I led my team out, where I made the crucial decisions that saved lives. He gestured at me. If I admitted someone else saved me, I'd have to face how helpless I really was, how scared, how completely out of control, and I couldn't live with that. So I rewrote the memory until I believed my own version. His voice dropped. And then I met you at that fundraiser. And you were so impressed by the hero story, so attracted to the idea of marrying someone brave and strong and heroic. And I wanted to be that person for you, wanted to be the man you saw when you looked at me. Tears tracked down his face now. So I kept embellishing, started a speaking circuit, gave interviews, built my entire identity around being the guy who saved his team. And the more I said it, the more real it felt, until I couldn't separate what actually happened from what I wished had happened. Amber stood frozen, watching the man she'd agreed to marry dissolve into someone she didn't recognize, someone who'd built their relationship on performance rather than truth. Derek turned to me, movements heavy. Elena, I don't expect forgiveness. Can't even ask for it, but I want you to know I'm done lying, done performing. I'm going to therapy, real therapy, and I'm going to face what actually happened that night. He paused. And I'm starting a program at the fire department, behind every hero, honoring crisis analysts. I'm bringing in coordinators to train with us, show firefighters what you actually do, make sure everyone understands that rescue is teamwork, That the people guiding us from command centers deserve recognition, not dismissal. Cole nodded approval. That's good, Derek. That's the right move. Derek's shoulders sagged. It's the only move. I can't keep living a lie. Can't build a life on stolen valor. He looked at Amber. Which means I can't marry you. The words dropped like a bomb into already devastated territory. Amber's face went white, then red, emotions cycling too fast to track. Her voice came out strangled. What? Derek reached for her hand, but she pulled away. I need to become someone real before I can be someone's husband. I need to figure out who Derek Sullivan actually is when he's not performing for an audience. And I can't do that while planning a wedding. Amber's breath came faster, panic rising. You're calling off the wedding? But before Derek could answer, something shifted in her expression. The panic morphed into something else. Not relief exactly, but recognition. Like seeing a door you'd been afraid to open suddenly standing ajar, showing you it wasn't locked after all. She pulled the engagement ring off her finger, movements deliberate, and set it on the coffee table between them. No, I am. Everyone stared. Even Derek looked shocked. Amber's voice strengthened. I can't marry you, Derek. Not because you lied about Redport, but because I encouraged you to. I loved the hero story. Loved having a fiancé I could show off. Loved the way people looked at me when I introduced you like I'd won some prize. She gestured at the ring. I didn't want truth. I wanted performance. A husband who looked good in photos and had impressive stories for dinner parties. And I was willing to overlook anything that complicated that narrative. She turned to me, including treating you like garbage, because you represented everything I was afraid to look at. You chose substance over appearance, purpose over approval. You're alone, but you're not lonely. You're powerful without needing someone else to make you important. Her hands twisted together, and I've spent my entire life trying to be perfect, trying to be loved, trying to get applause. I don't even know who I am underneath all the performance. Don't know what I actually want versus what I think I'm supposed to want. She looked at Derek. We can't get married when neither of us knows who we are. When we're both just playing roles we think we're supposed to play. The silence that followed felt different from the earlier shocks. This was processing silence, the space people need when their understanding of reality shifts so completely. They have to rebuild their mental frameworks from the ground up. Uncle George finally moved, crossing to the sideboard, pouring himself a bourbon with shaking hands. This is a lot to take in. Aunt Margaret nodded, her voice carrying bewilderment. I don't understand any of this. How did we get here? This was supposed to be a celebration. I felt exhaustion creeping in, the weight of revelations settling into my bones. This happened because Derek mocked my work at dinner, called people like me support staff who panic under pressure, used my story to make himself look brave while dismissing the actual work that kept him alive. I looked around at all of them, and nobody questioned it. Nobody thought it was strange that he'd take full credit for navigation he couldn't have accomplished alone. Nobody wondered who that voice on the radio was, or why they might have stayed anonymous. My voice hardened slightly. You all just accepted the narrative that made you comfortable. The one where the tall, handsome firefighter was the hero, and the middle-aged woman who never married was exactly as insignificant as you'd always assumed she was. Vincent set his phone down. You're right, and I'm ashamed that I needed evidence on a screen to believe you were telling the truth. That your word wasn't enough without documentation. Judith stood, crossing to me again. What can we do? How do we fix this? The question was genuine, but impossible. You couldn't fix 20 years of assumptions with an evening's apology. You couldn't rebuild trust that had never fully existed in the first place. But you could start. You could plant seeds and tend them and hope they grew into something sturdy enough to support actual relationship rather than comfortable fiction. I looked at her. You can start by asking instead of assuming, by being curious about who I actually am instead of deciding who I should be, by celebrating success instead of finding ways to diminish it. I turned to Vincent. And you can stop offering advice I didn't ask for. Stop treating me like someone who needs guidance, rather than someone who's been successfully navigating her own life for decades. Then Amber. And you can figure out who you are without an audience. What you actually want when nobody's watching, when there's no approval to earn, when it's just you and your choices. The room felt heavy with all that had been said, all that had been exposed. all the comfortable certainties that had been stripped away, leaving only uncomfortable truth. Derek picked up the charred metal piece from where Vincent had set it down, turning it over in his hands. "This belongs to you. It always has." He walked to me, held it out. I kept it because it made me feel connected to that night, to surviving, to being someone who'd faced death and won. But it's not mine to keep. It's yours. Evidence of what you did while I was blind and helpless and utterly dependent on your voice. I took it, feeling the weight, the rough texture, the physical reality of something that had existed in my memory as pixels and data for 3 years. "Thank you." Derek nodded. "I meant what I said about the program, about making sure crisis analysts get recognition. If you're willing, I'd like you to be part of it. Help design the training, show firefighters what you actually do." Cole stepped forward. "I'll help too. Unit 6 all will. We owe you that and a lot more." I looked at the metal in my hands, at the people surrounding me in various states of shock and realization, at the evening that had turned into something none of us had expected. My voice came out tired but steady. "I'll think about it. Right now I need air again. Real air, not this pressure cooker." I grabbed my coat, headed for the door. Nobody tried to stop me this time. They understood, perhaps, that some things needed to be processed alone, that revelation required space to settle before it could be fully absorbed. The cold outside felt cleaner now, purposeful rather than punishing. Snow had accumulated while we'd been inside, tearing down walls, the world continuing its transformation regardless of human drama. I walked to my Mercedes, remote unlocking it with a soft beep. The leather seats felt familiar, grounding, a reminder of the life I'd built that nobody in that house had known existed. I didn't get in, just stood beside it, one hand on the roof, breathing cold air that stung my lungs in a way that felt clarifying. Footsteps crunched through snow. I turned to see Cole approaching, his posture careful, giving me space to send him away if I wanted. He stopped a few feet distant. "You okay?" I almost laughed. "That's a complicated question." He nodded. "Fair. That was intense. More intense than I expected when I followed you out the first time." We stood in silence for a moment, snow falling between us, each flake a tiny piece of transformation accumulating into something larger. Cole's voice carried careful curiosity. "Can I ask you something?" I gestured permission. He looked at me directly. "Do you regret it, revealing everything? Keeping that secret for 3 years and then letting it out all at once?" The question deserved consideration. Did I regret it? Regret watching Derek's face crumble as reality crashed through his constructed narrative? Regret forcing my family to confront their assumptions? Regret exposure that could never be taken back, that had changed every relationship in that house permanently? I tested the feeling, examined it from multiple angles, tried to separate immediate discomfort from deeper truth. Finally, no, I don't regret it. I'm exhausted, and it's going to be complicated moving forward, and I don't know if those relationships can be repaired. But I don't regret telling the truth. Cole smiled slightly. Good. Because what happened in there? That needed to happen. Maybe not tonight, maybe not at a wedding celebration, but eventually, truth deferred doesn't disappear. It just gets heavier. He pulled a business card from his pocket. "This is me, personal cell on the back. If you need anything, testimony for Derek's program, someone to talk to who understands what that night was like, coffee with someone who's also single and tired of people treating it like a tragedy, call me." I took the card, tucked it into my coat pocket. "Thank you for backing me up in there, for telling the truth when you didn't have to." He shrugged. "You saved my life. Least I can do is save your reputation from someone stealing it." We stood there another moment, comfortable in the silence. Two people who'd shared something intense without having to explain it. Then Cole stepped back. "I should get back inside. People are going to need processing time, and someone should make sure Derek doesn't collapse completely." I nodded. "I'm going back to Minneapolis tonight. I'll get a hotel, drive back tomorrow. Can't stay here after all that." He understood without explanation. Safe drive, and Elena. What you built, the career, the business, the life. Don't let anyone make you feel like you have to apologize for it. He walked back toward the house, leaving me alone with snow and silence, and the weight of truth finally spoken aloud. I got into the Mercedes, started the engine, let it warm while snow accumulated on the windshield. Through the house windows, I could see shadows moving, people still processing, still trying to rebuild their understanding of reality around new information. My phone buzzed. Text from Judith. Please don't leave. Stay. We need to talk more. I need to know you. I stared at the message, weighing obligation against exhaustion, family against self-preservation. 3 years ago, I would have stayed, would have prioritized their comfort over my need for space, would have managed their emotions while ignoring my own. But 3 years ago, I was someone who kept secrets to protect other people's feelings, someone who made herself small so others could feel big, someone who apologized for excellence because excellence made people uncomfortable. Tonight had changed that. Not permanently, maybe not even completely, but enough that I could text back. I need space tonight. We can talk tomorrow. I promise we'll talk. But right now, I need to process alone. The response came quickly. I understand. I love you. I'm sorry I never showed you that properly. The words blurred slightly. I blinked, realizing my eyes had filled, that something in my chest had cracked open just enough to let feeling through armor I'd worn so long it had started feeling like skin. I wiped my eyes, put the car in reverse, began the drive back to Minneapolis, back to my penthouse with its floor-to-ceiling windows and view of a city that had never asked me to be smaller than I was. Back to my office, where crisis was managed, not created. Back to the life I'd built from competence and conviction, and the stubborn belief that I deserved success, even when nobody else believed it. The highway was mostly empty, snow making the world feel muffled and distant. I drove in silence, no music, just the hum of expensive engineering and my own thoughts spiraling through everything that had happened. Tomorrow would bring consequences, phone calls, conversations, the difficult work of rebuilding relationships from honesty rather than assumption, Derek's program to develop, decisions about how much involvement I wanted with a family that had only just started seeing me clearly. But tonight belonged to me. Tonight was for processing, for letting the armor crack further, for sitting with the reality that I'd spent 3 years protecting people who hadn't protected me, hiding success because visibility felt dangerous, choosing invisibility as armor when armor shouldn't have been necessary. The city lights appeared on the horizon, familiar and welcoming, a skyline I'd helped keep safe through disasters nobody would remember, through crises that had been averted rather than survived, through the quiet work of prevention that never made headlines. My phone buzzed again, not Judith this time. Email notification. Subject line, Emergency Services Recognition Nomination. I glanced at the preview. Director Patricia Chen had nominated me for the Governor's Medal of Honor, 3 years after I'd turned it down the first time. The note said, time to stop hiding. Let them see what you've accomplished. I set the phone down, smiled despite exhaustion, despite complication, despite everything that would need to be addressed in the morning. Maybe she was right. Maybe it was time to stop hiding, time to let visibility happen, to trust that I'd built something solid enough to withstand scrutiny, to believe that excellence didn't need to apologize for existing. The Mercedes handled the snowy roads perfectly, carrying me home through a transformed landscape, toward a future that looked different than the past, toward relationships that would have to be rebuilt from truth rather than comfortable fiction. And for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't carrying the weight of a secret that didn't belong to me. Wasn't protecting people who'd never asked what needed protecting. Wasn't making myself smaller so others could feel adequate. I was just Elena Morrison, crisis management director, business owner, woman who'd saved 6 lives while staying invisible. Woman who'd finally let herself be seen. And whatever came next, I'd face it the same way I'd faced every crisis for 25 years. With competence, with clarity, and with the absolute certainty that I knew how to navigate through smoke even when others couldn't see the path. The penthouse parking garage welcomed me home, concrete and fluorescent lights replacing snow and darkness. I pulled into my designated spot, cut the engine, sat in sudden silence that felt both peaceful and weighted. Tomorrow, everything would be different. Tonight, I just needed to rest. 6 months later, spring had turned Minneapolis into something almost optimistic. The city had shed its winter coat, trading snow for green, ice for flowing water, the kind of transformation that made people believe in second chances and new beginnings. My office windows framed the Mississippi River, sunlight catching the current in ways that looked almost intentional, like nature performing for an audience. The charred metal piece sat on my desk now, no longer hidden, no longer a secret that needed protecting. I'd had it professionally mounted on walnut, added a small plaque with clean engraving. For the voice that saw what we couldn't, Unit 6, Redport Chemical, 2022. It caught morning light the same way the river did. Evidence of destruction transformed into something worth displaying. My phone buzzed. Text from Amber. Can we meet? I need to talk to someone who actually knows who they are. I smiled at the phrasing, recognizing growth in the admission of not knowing, in the willingness to ask for help instead of performing certainty. 6 months had changed her in visible ways. Fewer Instagram posts, more questions than declarations. The kind of transformation that happened when performance gave way to actual living. I texted back coordinates for a coffee shop in Northeast Minneapolis. The kind of place that served espresso to artists and startups, where nobody cared about appearances, and everyone was too focused on their own projects to judge yours. She arrived 20 minutes later, and the difference was striking. No designer dress, no carefully applied makeup, creating the illusion of effortless perfection. Jeans that looked genuinely comfortable, a simple sweater, hair pulled back in a way that prioritized function over aesthetics. She looked younger somehow, less polished, but more present, like she'd stopped performing for invisible cameras. She slid into the chair across from me, ordered coffee without checking the calorie count, met my eyes without the old defensive pride. I quit teaching. The announcement landed without preamble, bold and uncertain simultaneously. I waited, giving her space to explain. Her hands wrapped around the coffee cup, not because teaching is bad, but because I became a teacher for all the wrong reasons. It looked nurturing, looked sweet, made me seem like the kind of woman people approved of. But I didn't love it. Didn't even like it most days. She took a breath. I spent 3 months after that night just existing. No plan, no direction. Mom was furious, said I was throwing away stability. Vincent kept sending me job listings for administrative positions. Things that would look responsible on paper. Her smile turned rueful. And I realized they were doing to me what they'd done to you, trying to fit me into roles that made them comfortable, rather than asking what I actually wanted. I sipped my own coffee, remembering that pressure, the weight of expectations, that had nothing to do with capability and everything to do with other people's need for predictable narratives. Amber continued. So I started volunteering at the hospital. Nothing fancy, just helping in the emergency department, doing whatever needed doing. Restocking supplies, getting blankets, talking to families while they waited. Her eyes brightened slightly. And I loved it. The chaos, the urgency, the feeling of being useful in concrete ways. Not performing usefulness, but actually being it. She pulled out her phone, showed me a screenshot. I applied to paramedic training, got accepted, start next month. Pride bloomed unexpected in my chest. Amber, that's incredible. Her smile wavered. Mom thinks I'm having a breakdown, throwing away my education, my future. She keeps saying I'm too old to start over. The 28 is when you should be settling down, not upending your entire life. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. 28. I'd been 34 when I'd made the choice that had defined my career, and everyone had acted like I'd committed some kind of treason against conventional wisdom. I met her eyes. You're not too old. You're exactly the right age to figure out who you are when nobody's writing the script. She exhaled shakily. That's what Derek said too. We still talk sometimes. Not romantic, we're both working on ourselves separately. But he gets it. The performance trap. Building your whole identity around other people's approval. She set her phone down. He's in intensive therapy, EMDR for the PTSD, cognitive behavioral work for the identity stuff. He told me something interesting last week. I waited. Amber's voice softened. He said that night at Redport, in those 38 minutes when your voice was guiding them through, he felt the most terrified and the most safe he'd ever felt simultaneously. Terrified because he was helpless. Safe because someone who knew what they were doing was taking care of him. She looked at me directly. And then he spent 3 years trying to erase that feeling because helplessness felt like weakness. So he rewrote the story until he was strong again, even if strong meant dishonest. The insight landed heavy, recognizing something true about the way people protect themselves from vulnerability. The way admitting you needed help sometimes feels more dangerous than the actual danger you survived. My phone buzzed again. Director Patricia Chen. Warehouse fire St. Cloud. 3 trapped, requesting Morrison Consulting immediate response. I glanced at the message. Calculations running automatically. St. Cloud was 90 minutes north. The command center would need 30 minutes to set up proper monitoring. Chemical warehouse meant potential for compound fires requiring specialized approach. Amber saw my expression shift. You have to go. I nodded. Industrial fire, people trapped. She stood without hesitation. Can I come? Not to help, I know I'm not qualified, but to watch, to see what you actually do? The request caught me off guard. 6 months ago, Amber had pitied my work. Now she wanted to witness it, to understand it, to see the thing she dismissed as paperwork revealed as something else entirely. I grabbed my bag. Stay out of the way, don't touch anything, and understand that if it gets intense, I won't have time to explain. Her nod was serious, mature. I understand. We drove north in the Mercedes, Amber quiet beside me, watching the landscape change from urban to industrial, processing whatever internal dialogue played through her mind. I made calls while driving, coordinating with St. Cloud Fire Department, confirming command center access, verifying thermal imaging availability. The warehouse was already visible from half a mile away, smoke column rising like a dark monument against spring sky. Fire trucks surrounded the building, hoses deployed, organized chaos of emergency response in full motion. I parked in the designated command area, grabbed my equipment bag, headed for the mobile command center that had been set up in an RV 40 yards from the building. Inside, controlled frenzy. 3 analysts at screens, radio chatter constant, thermal feeds showing the building's interior as color-coded heat maps. I scanned the setup instantly, identifying gaps, assessing coverage, calculating what information was available and what was missing. Chief Rodriguez looked up when I entered, relief obvious. Morrison, thank God, we've got 3 security guards trapped in the northwest section. Smoke too thick for visual structural integrity questionable. Need your eyes. I moved to the central screen, Amber pressed against the wall behind me, staying invisible as promised. Show me thermal feeds from the last 5 minutes. The analyst pulled up the data. I watched heat patterns evolve, smoke movement, the way temperature distributed through space, building a mental model of what was happening inside that structure. My voice shifted automatically, dropping into crisis mode. Chemical warehouse? Rodriguez. Industrial solvents, mixed storage. We don't have complete manifests for everything in there. Worse than I'd hoped. Mixed chemicals meant unpredictable reactions, compounds that could turn a standard fire into something catastrophic if the wrong substances met. I studied the thermal map. The trap personnel, did they have radio? The radio operator nodded. Intermittent, smoke's interfering with signal. I pulled on a headset, adjusted the microphone. Security team, this is command. I have thermal visual on your position. Can you confirm you're in the northwest storage area? Static, then a voice. Male, panicked. Yes, we're trapped. Can't see anything. Smoke everywhere. I zoomed the thermal display. I can see you. 3 heat signatures. You're approximately 60 feet from the loading dock exit. But between you and that exit, there's a chemical spill. I'm reading temperatures consistent with active combustion. The security guard's voice cracked. What do we do? I scanned alternative routes, calculating distances against oxygen consumption, structure stability against time remaining. There's a secondary path, service corridor on your east side. You need to move 15 feet to your right. Find a door. Beside me, an analyst muttered, "That corridor's marked as structurally compromised in the building plans." I pulled up the architectural overlay, comparing it to current thermal readings. The plans are outdated. Building was renovated 2 years ago. The corridor was reinforced. Thermal shows the support beams are still intact. I watched Amber from the corner of my eye, saw her face transforming as she processed what was happening. The speed of assessment, the layers of information being synthesized, the calculations running beneath calm voice and steady hands. Into the radio. Security team, move right, count your steps, 15. You should feel a wall, follow that wall forward. There's a door approximately 8 feet ahead. The thermal display showed the heat signatures moving, slow, uncertain. 3 people trying to navigate through smoke that turned their world into blind guessing. One signature stopped. I found the wall! My eyes tracked their progress. Good, keep moving forward. Slow, steady. The door should be. Temperature spike on the thermal display. Chemical reaction, fast-moving, heat blooming exactly where they'd been standing 30 seconds ago. My voice sharpened. Faster! You need to move faster. Chemical fire spreading behind you. 30 seconds before it reaches your position. The heat signatures moved quicker now. Fear overriding caution. Survival instinct taking control. 20 seconds. My hand hovered over the display, willing them forward, watching the gap between them and safety shrink, while the gap between them and fire closed even faster. 15 seconds. One signature stumbled, heat reading dropping as the person fell. My voice cut through. Someone just fell. Pick them up. No time for careful. Grab and go. 10 seconds. The fallen signature lifted, supported by the other two. 5 seconds. All three heat signatures crossed the threshold into the service corridor, just as the fire reached their previous position. I exhaled, tension releasing slightly. You're in the corridor. The exit is 60 feet straight ahead. Temperature in that corridor is manageable. Move steady and you'll make it out. Rodriguez watched the thermal display. That was close. My voice stayed level. That's why we calculate margins. Close is acceptable as long as it's survivable. 2 minutes later, 3 security guards stumbled out of the loading dock, coughing, covered in soot, alive. Fire crews moved in with proper protective equipment, beginning the work of containment now that civilians were clear. I pulled off the headset, made notes in the incident log, confirmed all data was being recorded for post-incident analysis. The work continued around me. Fire wasn't extinguished, building wasn't secured, crisis wasn't resolved. But my immediate piece was finished. The people who'd been in immediate danger were safe. Everything else was important, but not urgent in the same visceral way. Amber hadn't moved from her position against the wall. When I finally looked at her, her eyes were wide, face pale, and I realized she was crying silently, tears tracking down cheeks while her hands gripped her arms tight enough to leave marks. I stepped over. You okay? Her voice came out shaky. That was, they were going to die, and you just calmly told them where to go like you were giving directions to a grocery store. I shook my head. Not calm, controlled. There's a difference. Inside I was calculating, reassessing, running worst-case scenarios. But showing that helps no one. She wiped at tears. How do you do this? How do you hold people's lives in your hands and stay functional? The question deserved honesty. Practice, training, and the understanding that falling apart helps no one. Someone has to stay steady when everything's chaos. Someone has to be the voice that cuts through panic and provides direction. That's the job. Amber looked back at the command center screens. And you do this how often? I checked my phone, scanning the last month's calendar. 3 to 5 times a month, sometimes more. Industrial accidents, natural disasters, chemical spills, structural failures. Anything where people need guidance through situations they can't navigate alone. Her face cycled through emotions. And nobody knows. Your family didn't know. I didn't know. You just do this work that saves lives and go home and nobody has any idea. I started packing up equipment. That was my choice. Protection through invisibility. Can't diminish what you don't know exists. Amber helped gather cables. But doesn't it hurt? Doing something that important and never getting credit? Never having anyone understand what you carry? The question touched something I'd been avoiding for 6 months, maybe for years. Did it hurt? The isolation of competence, the loneliness of being good at something people couldn't see, the weight of carrying knowledge of your own capabilities while everyone around you assumed you were ordinary? Finally, sometimes. But recognition comes with expectations. Visibility brings scrutiny. And I wasn't sure I wanted to defend my choices to people who'd already decided they were wrong. We drove back toward Minneapolis in silence, Amber processing, me decompressing from the adrenaline spike of crisis coordination. The sun angled lower, painting the highway golden, that particular light that made spring feel possible even after the longest winter. Amber spoke suddenly. I want that. I glanced over. Want what? Her voice carried certainty I'd never heard before. That feeling of mattering in a concrete way, of having skills that save people, of being so competent that panic becomes secondary to procedure. She turned to me. Not crisis management specifically, but that sense of purpose, of knowing exactly what to do when everything's falling apart, of being the person others can depend on when dependency isn't optional. I smiled. That's what good paramedics do. Different scale, different context, same principle. Stay functional when others can't. Provide steady guidance through chaos. Her expression shifted to determination. Then I'm doing this right, the training, the career change, all of it. This is what I want, not for applause, not for approval, because it matters. We stopped at a red light. I looked at her properly. You're going to be good at it. Once you stop trying to be perfect and start trying to be present. She nodded, processing, and something in her face looked older, more grounded, like she'd found bedrock after years of standing on shifting sand. My phone rang. Judith. Elena, can we really talk, not performance, just conversation? I answered. I'm driving. Let me call you back in an hour. Her voice carried relief. Yes, thank you. I know I don't have the right to your time, but thank you. The call ended. Amber looked curious. Your mom? I nodded. We've been talking, weekly phone calls, she's trying, asking questions instead of making assumptions. It's awkward, it's awkward sometimes, but it's real. Amber smiled. That's good. Real is better than comfortable. We reached the coffee shop where we'd started, parked, sat for a moment before getting out. Amber turned to me. Can I ask you something? Something personal? I gestured permission. She hesitated. Are you happy? Living alone, focused on work, no partner or family of your own? Because everyone acts like that's tragic. But watching you today, you seemed more alive in that command center than I've ever seen anyone at a wedding or baby shower. The question cut deeper than she probably intended, touching the core of choices I'd spent decades defending. Was I happy? The word felt insufficient, too simple for the complexity of a life built around competence rather than convention. I considered carefully. I'm satisfied, fulfilled, content in ways that don't require constant validation. Happy feels like a state that depends on circumstances. What I have is deeper. It's knowing I'm living the life I chose rather than the life I was supposed to want. Amber processed this. But don't you get lonely? Honest answer. Sometimes. Usually at night, when crisis is quiet and the city's sleeping. But lonely and alone are different. I'm alone by choice. Lonely is temporary. And I'd rather be occasionally lonely in a life I love than constantly accompanied in a life I'm performing. She nodded slowly. That's what I'm starting to understand, that being alone isn't the same as being incomplete. We got out of the car. Before she left, Amber pulled me into a hug that felt genuine, not performative. Thank you for letting me see what you do, for showing me what real strength looks like. I hugged back. You're going to be fine, Amber. Better than fine. You're going to be someone who knows who she is when nobody's watching. She pulled away, wiping eyes again. I hope so. I really hope so. I watched her walk to her own car, seeing someone transformed by recognition of what she didn't know, by willingness to start over, by the courage it takes to admit performance isn't the same as living. My phone buzzed. Email from Director Patricia Chen. Governor's medal ceremony scheduled for June 15th. You're accepting this time, right? Right, no more hiding? I stared at the message, feeling the weight of visibility, the exposure that came with recognition, the way accepting awards meant standing in spotlight that could illuminate or burn, but also the value of showing other women that competence deserves celebration, that choosing career didn't mean apologizing for it, that excellence could be acknowledged without requiring justification. I typed back, yes, I'll accept. On one condition, Derek Sullivan gets recognized too. For the program he's building, for the honesty it took to start it. Her response came quickly. Deal. You're both getting medals. About damn time. I drove to my penthouse, let myself into space that had become sanctuary. Floor-to-ceiling windows framing city lights beginning to emerge as dusk settled. The life I'd built surrounded me. Art I'd chosen, furniture I'd selected, silence I'd cultivated. The medal sat on my desk beside the charred metal from Redport, waiting for the ceremony that would make recognition official. Two pieces of evidence that truth existed, whether acknowledged or not, that work done in silence still saved lives, that recognition delayed wasn't recognition denied. My phone rang. Cole Martinez. Hey, I know it's short notice, but I'm in Minneapolis tonight. Fire department conference. Any chance you're free for dinner? The invitation landed unexpected. Casual, but weighted with possibility. I considered the evening ahead. Empty calendar, quiet apartment, solitude I'd chosen and mostly enjoyed. Then, yeah, I'm free. Where? His voice carried a smile. There's a place in Northeast. brick oven pizza, craft beer, nothing fancy. Thought we could talk about the training program Derek's building. Get your input on what actually works. Work conversation. Safe territory. Professional collaboration with someone who understood crisis without needing it explained. But also, dinner with someone who'd seen me at my most competent and hadn't needed me to be smaller for his comfort. Someone who'd backed me up when backing up wasn't required. Someone whose single status he'd mentioned 6 months ago felt less like tragedy and more like choice. I grabbed my jacket. Text me the address. I'll meet you there in 30 minutes. The restaurant was exactly what he'd described. Casual, loud, full of people more interested in food than appearances. Cole sat at a corner table, looking comfortable in civilian clothes, less firefighter, and more just person. Someone who understood pressure without being defined by it. He stood when I arrived, offered a handshake that turned into a brief hug. Thanks for coming. I know your schedule's insane. Derek was already there, sitting across from Cole, and beside him, a woman I didn't recognize. Late 30s, warm smile, elementary school teacher energy radiating from her posture, and floral print dress. Derek stood. Elena, this is Maya, my girlfriend. Maya, this is Elena Morrison, the woman who saved my life and changed everything. Maya extended her hand. I've heard so much about you. Derek told me the real story, the whole truth. It's an honor to meet you. Something in Derek's face looked lighter, unburdened, like confession had carved away the weight he'd been carrying. He pulled out a chair. Amber said she'd try to come after her shift. We thought, why not make it a celebration? All of us who survived that night and came out better. Amber arrived 20 minutes later, still in her EMT trainee uniform, face flushed from rushing. She slid into the seat beside me. Sorry, multi-vehicle accident on 94. I gotta do my first IV placement under supervision. Her excitement was infectious, genuine, the enthusiasm of someone discovering their calling rather than performing someone else's script. We ordered pizza to share, drinks that flowed into easy conversation. Derek talked about the training program, now expanded to 3 other fire departments. Maya shared stories about teaching that made everyone laugh. Amber described paramedic training with brutal honesty that made it sound terrible and wonderful simultaneously. Cole's hand found mine under the table at some point. Casual, natural, the kind of connection that didn't require announcement or definition, that simply existed because it felt right. My phone buzzed. I glanced at it. Text from Judith. Then another from Vincent. Then Amber's phone lit up on the table. Cole noticed. Everything okay? I opened the messages. Judith. I'm so proud of you, baby. The medal ceremony invitation arrived today. I'm crying reading about your accomplishments. I'm sorry it took me so long to see you clearly. I love you. Vincent. That medal is impressive, but not as impressive as everything you've built. You're remarkable, sis. Always have been. Mom and I are driving together to the ceremony. Wouldn't miss it. Amber was reading her own phone, eyes filling. It's from Derek's program director. They want me to speak at the next training session about what it's like watching crisis management from the outside and deciding to join emergency services. She looked up. They're offering to pay for my advanced certifications if I commit to teaching alongside my paramedic work. Derek smiled. That's because you're good at this, natural at it. They see what I saw when you watched Elena work, someone who belongs in crisis response. The table went quiet for a moment, all of us processing our separate messages, our individual transformations, the way 6 months had rebuilt what one night had demolished. Maya raised her glass. I don't know most of the backstory here, but I know Derek is different now. Honest, present, working on himself instead of performing for others. And from what he's told me, that's because of you, Elena, because you told the truth when it was hard. So thank you. We clinked glasses, the sound crystal clear in the noisy restaurant, a moment of recognition that felt earned rather than obligatory. Cole leaned closer. I have something to tell you, all of you, actually. Everyone turned. His voice carried careful certainty. I took a position in Minneapolis, Deputy Chief of Training Coordination. Start next month. The training center needs someone who understands both crisis response and fire operations, someone who can bridge the gap. He looked at me. That's the professional reason. The personal reason is I'd like to be closer to someone who understands what it's like to carry responsibility most people don't see. Amber grinned. Are you saying what I think you're saying? Cole smiled. I'm saying Elena and I have been talking for 6 months, and I'd like to see where this goes without 100 miles of highway between us. Derek nodded approval. That's good, really good. You both deserve someone who gets it. The conversation flowed around me, excitement about Cole's move, questions about the training center, Amber's stories about paramedic school. But I felt something settling inside, pieces clicking into place that I hadn't realized were scattered. Recognition from my family, Amber's transformation, Derek's genuine growth, Cole's relocation, the governor's medal ceremony approaching. Everything I'd built in silence was becoming visible, and instead of feeling exposed, I felt solid. Like visibility couldn't touch the foundation, because the foundation had been built from competence rather than approval. The dinner wound down eventually, plates cleared, final drinks finished. We lingered at the table, none of us quite ready to end the evening, to return to individual lives after this moment of collective recognition. Derek stood first, extending his hand to me. Thank you for not destroying me, for letting me earn my way back. I shook his hand. You destroyed yourself. I just told the truth. What you did after, the therapy, the program, the honesty with Maya, that was all you. All. He nodded, accepting the distinction. Amber hugged me tight. I start advanced training next month, critical care paramedic certification. It's brutal, but I love every impossible moment of it. Maya and Derek left first, his arm around her shoulders in a way that looked comfortable rather than performative. Amber followed shortly after, waving as she headed back to her car, back to textbooks and practice scenarios and the life she'd chosen instead of the life she'd been performing. Cole and I walked to the parking garage together, the evening cool and clear. Minneapolis spread out around us in geometric light patterns, each building a story, each window a life being lived. He stopped beside my Mercedes. So, that happened. I smelled. Which part? His expression turned serious. The part where I admitted I'm relocating to be closer to you. The part where I made my interest extremely obvious in front of witnesses. I leaned against the car. You did. He stepped closer. And how do you feel about that? The question deserved honesty. Terrified, hopeful, curious, all of it simultaneously. Cole's hand found mine. Good, because if you were certain, I'd worry you weren't taking this seriously. Uncertainty means you're actually considering what this could become. He pulled me closer, and the kiss that followed wasn't tentative or questioning. It was the kiss of two people who'd spent 6 months building foundation, who understood that connection required honesty rather than performance, who knew that real relationship was built from showing up consistently rather than grand gestures. When we pulled apart, he touched the space where the medal would hang at the ceremony. You deserve all of this. The recognition, the respect, the life you've built. Don't let anyone, including yourself, convince you otherwise. I looked at him properly, someone who'd seen me save lives, who'd witnessed my family's dismissal and stood up for truth, who'd spent 6 months proving through consistent action that interest could be patient, that connection could be built through phone calls and coffee meetings and the slow work of knowing someone. My voice came out steady. I'd like you to come to the ceremony, as my guest, not just as program coordinator, but as, he smiled, as the guy who's interested in seeing where this goes. I nodded, yeah, that. Cole kissed me again, softer this time. I'd be honored. We stood in the parking garage for another moment, neither of us quite ready to end the evening, to separate into our individual cars and drive to our separate homes. Finally, I should go. Early meeting tomorrow about the director position Patricia offered. His eyebrows rose. Director position? I explained quickly. Patricia retiring, recommendation, statewide authority over crisis management. Cole listened. Then, are you going to take it? The question I'd been avoiding for weeks. I think so. It's terrifying. More visibility than I've ever had. But also, it's acknowledging what I've been doing unofficially for years, making the authority match the responsibility. He nodded. You'll be brilliant at it. You already are. I got into my car, rolled down the window. Cole leaned in. Drive safe. Text me when you get home. I smiled. You sound like someone who cares. His expression turned serious. I do care. Have been caring for 6 months. Just wanted to make sure you were ready to know that. I pulled out of the parking space, watching him in the rearview mirror as I navigated toward the exit. He stood there until I turned the corner, hand raised in farewell, face carrying that particular expression of someone who'd taken a risk and was waiting to see how it landed. The drive home took 15 minutes. City streets familiar and comfortable, the route I'd driven hundreds of times. But tonight felt different, charged with possibility, weighted with recognition, full of futures that were beginning to look real rather than theoretical. I parked in my building's garage, grabbed my bag, walked toward the elevator. My phone buzzed with Cole's text. "Made it home, sleep well, see you Friday for coffee or dinner, both?" I typed back. "Both sounds good, thank you for tonight." His response came immediately. "Thank you for 6 months of patience while I got my life together enough to relocate. Worth every second." The elevator carried me up to my floor, doors opening onto the hallway that led to my penthouse. I unlocked the door, stepped into space that felt less like sanctuary and more like home. The difference being that sanctuary was where you hid, and home was where you belonged. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city, lights spreading in patterns that looked almost intentional, like Minneapolis was performing just for me. I set my bag down, poured wine, stood at the glass watching the world below continue its relentless motion. Tomorrow would bring the director position decision. Friday would bring dinner with Cole. Next month would bring the governor's medal ceremony, where I'd stand on stage and let myself be visible. Let competence be acknowledged. Let excellence be celebrated without apology. But tonight belonged to this moment, standing in my own life, surrounded by evidence of choices made well, holding a wine glass that cost more than my family had ever imagined I could afford, looking out at a city I'd helped keep safe through disasters nobody would remember, through crises averted rather than survived, through the quiet work of prevention that never made headlines. My phone buzzed one final time. Text from Patricia. "Made your decision yet?" I looked at the city, at my reflection in the glass. Woman who'd saved lives while invisible, who'd built an empire from silence, who'd chosen excellence over ease and purpose over performance. I typed back, "Yes, I'm accepting the director position. Time to stop hiding." Her response, "About damn time. Welcome to visibility, Elena. It looks good on you." I smiled at my reflection, at the woman in the glass who looked confident and capable and no longer afraid of being seen. The woman who'd finally understood that recognition didn't diminish competence. It simply made it harder for others to pretend it didn't exist. I raised my wine glass to the empty apartment, to the city below, to the future that felt less frightening than it once had, to knowing your seat at the table, and when they don't offer you one, building your own damn table. The words echoed in silence that wasn't empty but full of possibility, full of Cole's relocation and Amber's transformation and Derek's honesty and my family's recognition, full of choices made deliberately rather than desperately, full of a life lived on purpose rather than by accident. I was Elena Morrison, Crisis Management Director, soon to be State Director of Emergency Services, business owner, medal recipient, woman who'd saved lives while invisible, who'd revealed herself and survived the exposure, who'd chosen excellence over ease and purpose over performance. And whatever came next, I'd face it the way I'd faced every crisis for 25 years, with competence, with clarity, with absolute certainty that I knew how to navigate through smoke even when others couldn't see the path. The elevator in the hallway dinged. Footsteps approached my door. A knock. I set down my wine, crossed to the door, looked through the peephole. Cole stood there, holding something wrapped in tissue paper. I opened the door. "Forget something?" He smiled, sheepish. "No, I was sitting in my hotel room and realized I didn't want the evening to end yet, so I stopped at the flower shop downstairs. They were about to close." He held out the tissue paper. Inside, a single sunflower, bright and absurd and perfect. His voice carried careful uncertainty. "I know it's one flower. I know that's possibly the least romantic gesture ever, but the florist said sunflowers mean loyalty and longevity, and I thought..." I pulled him inside, kissed him before he could finish explaining, before uncertainty could override the gesture, before the moment could pass. When we pulled apart, he looked dazed. "So the flower was okay?" I laughed, actual sound filling the apartment. "The flower is perfect. You're perfect. This entire ridiculous gesture is perfect." He stepped further into the apartment, taking in the space properly for the first time. The windows, the view, the life I'd built in silence. His voice carried genuine appreciation. "This is incredible. You built all of this?" I nodded. Every piece, every choice, everything you see. Cole turned to me, expression shifting to something more serious. I meant what I said at dinner about relocating, about wanting to see where this goes. But I need you to know I'm not here to fix you or complete you or any of that nonsense. You're already complete. I'm here because being around you makes me want to be better at being myself. The words landed somewhere deep, touching the part of me that had spent decades believing connection required diminishment. That partnership meant making yourself smaller so someone else could feel big. My voice came out rougher than intended. I don't know how to do this. Relationship, connection, letting someone in when I've spent so long building walls. He set the sunflower on the counter. Then we figure it out together. No script, no performance, just two people who understand what it's like to carry weight nobody else sees. Learning how to share that weight instead of carrying it alone. I looked at him standing in my apartment. This man who'd relocated his entire life on the possibility that maybe, just maybe, connection was worth the risk of being seen. My voice steadied. I'm accepting the director position, which means more visibility, more pressure, more people watching. And I'm terrified that being visible means being vulnerable, that letting people see me clearly gives them power to hurt me. Cole crossed to me, hands gentle on my shoulders. Being visible also means being undeniable. They can't minimize what they can see clearly, can't dismiss what's documented and celebrated. Visibility is armor as much as vulnerability. He smiled. Besides, you've spent 25 years saving lives in silence. Time to let the world see what you can do when you're not hiding. We stood there in my penthouse, city lights framing us through floor-to-ceiling windows. Two people who'd survived different fires, learning how to build something that didn't require either of us to burn. Finally, stay for coffee in the morning, for conversation that doesn't have an agenda, for whatever this becomes when we stop overthinking it. Cole's smile reached his eyes. I'd like that. All of it. We moved to the couch, sitting close but not pressed, comfortable in proximity without needing constant contact. The conversation flowed easy, crisis stories, childhood memories, the paths that had led us both to careers built around staying steady when everything fell apart. Hours passed. The city below shifted from evening to night to that particular quality of darkness right before dawn. And somewhere in those hours, I realized something fundamental had changed. I wasn't alone anymore. Not because I'd needed someone to complete me, but because I'd found someone who understood that completion came from within. That partnership was about two whole people choosing to walk beside each other, rather than one incomplete person searching for their missing half. Cole fell asleep on the couch around 3, head tilted back, face peaceful. I watched him for a moment. This man who'd chosen patience, who'd relocated on possibility, who'd shown up with a single sunflower and made it feel like abundance. I grabbed a blanket, draped it over him, stood at the window watching dawn begin to break over Minneapolis. The city was waking up, lights clicking off in bedrooms as lights clicked on in kitchens. The daily transformation from sleep to motion, from stillness to purpose. My reflection in the glass looked different somehow. Not changed externally, but shifted internally. The woman who'd spent decades hiding was learning how to be visible. The woman who'd chosen solitude was learning how to choose connection. The woman who'd built armor was learning that sometimes the bravest thing was taking it off. Tomorrow, the governor's medal ceremony would make recognition official. Next month, I'd accept the director position and step fully into visibility. Next year, who knew what next year would bring? More crises, more lives saved, more moments of standing steady while everything around me fell apart. But also, Cole waking up on my couch and making terrible coffee in my expensive machine, Amber calling with paramedic stories that made me proud, Derek continuing his program and proving that people could change when they chose honesty over performance, my mother asking questions instead of making assumptions, Vincent treating me like an equal rather than a project. The life I'd built was no longer solitary by necessity. It was simply life, complex and full and occasionally messy and entirely, completely mine. I turned from the window, looked at Cole sleeping on my couch, at the sunflower on my counter, at the space I'd created that was finally truly home. Truly. And I smile. Blah. Because I'd been invisible for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen, to be witnessed, to stand in the light and discover it didn't burn. It simply illuminated what had always been there, waiting for someone brave enough to look directly at it. I was Elena Morrison, and I was done hiding.